Compañeros, welcome to the SQL Data Partners podcast, the podcast dedicated to SQL Server related topics, which is designed to help you become familiar with what's out there, how you might use those features or ideas on how you might apply them in your environments. I am Carlos L. Chacon.
And I am Steve Stedman. We are two data professionals trying to help others get a better handle on their database environments, either through this podcast, our training, or our consulting practice. Thanks for joining us on the SQL Trail. Welcome to the show.
SQL Data Partners.
Compañeros, welcome to episode 102. If you've been listening to the program for a while, thanks. Thanks for sticking around. We appreciate it. We're talking program. Welcome, and we hope you enjoy what you hear.
If you're new to the program, with this being episode 102, keep in mind that we have 101 episodes that are in your queue that you can go back and listen to.
That's right. That's a long slog, as many have said. Well, in today's episode, we're talking with Tracy Boggiano.
Yes, Tracy works with ChannelAdvisor, and the topic is monitoring availability groups.
That's right. Yeah, we've hit our requisite 7 episodes without a ChannelAdvisor employee, and so we're back again. And interestingly enough, so they are hiring. So if you want to go and work with those guys, they're in the Raleigh area. So take a peek at that and tell them that Steve and Carlos sent you.
Wait, are you telling me to apply or our guest to apply?
I'm not sure that they would appreciate the remoteness and the of what you'd want to do there, Steve. The other folks in the community.
The commute would be a bit challenging for me, I think.
I think a bit. I think here at SQL Data Partners is a much better fit for you.
Yep. All right. Well, I'll stick around then.
Hey, there you go. And it was interesting. So, and not to belittle any of the folks who have been on the podcast or any other folks in the community. But Brian mentioned that he said because they have, I don't know, I guess a team of, was it 10 DBAs, something like that. And he said, while they, so half of them are in the community and they're, well known, they've been on this podcast and things. And he's like, some of it's the other half that aren't in the community. And he said, those guys are, they're the best DBAs I've ever worked with. And so I thought it was kind of an interesting comment that he made there.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're talking about monitoring availability groups. So again, the ChannelAdvisor folks, they've put out a few availability groups. You know that can be a bit challenging as far as that can be a bit challenging as far as, and in fact, I was on the Slack forum the other day, and Rob from the DBA tools, it wasn't his servers, but he kind of was involved because a friend asked him to get involved, and had a situation where both of his availability groups, the nodes thought they were the primary, and so that was a bit of fun.
Oh, is that what they call the split brain scenario?
The split brain scenario, exactly.
Yeah. Wow, that's a tough spot to be in.
Oh yeah, no doubt, exactly. And so while we won't necessarily get into that, that's not the topic of our conversation today. Tracy does give us some thoughts about how you'd go about taking a look at those availability groups and making sure that everything's okay, everything's in check.
All right. So, Carlos, do we have some compañero shout-outs today?
We do. And special thanks to Naveen Kumar, who actually left us a message via the podcast page.
Naveen from India. I'm one of the regular listener of your podcast. You guys are doing an amazing job. I just finished listening to the 100th episode. That's some big milestone. Congratulations to you guys.
Wow. Thanks, Naveen. That was great. We love the feedback.
That's right. Glad you enjoyed episode 100. I know we enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun doing it. We'd also like to thank everyone who's been connecting with us on LinkedIn. This has been a great segue. I think just more people are on LinkedIn, and it's been nice to be able to communicate with you in maybe a more private nature than, say, Twitter. And so thanks for the comments. We definitely appreciated it.
Yeah, and I know I'm definitely enjoying the conversations I've had with listeners through LinkedIn as well.
Right.
And it sort of took my LinkedIn profile from feeling kind of stale to now there's a lot going on there. So I check it a little bit more often.
Yes. Very good. Okay, so compañeros, I have a favor to ask. As you know, Steve and I have been talking about the conference here for some time. We think we have a pretty good schedule. We've got great speakers. We have a good venue, and we have good ideas here. We've been talking with some of you, and if you've already provided feedback, thanks, particularly Eugene. I appreciate your comments. But what I'm asking everybody to do is to go ahead and take a peek. If you haven't looked at it lately, go ahead and take another peek at compañeroconference.com. Particularly if you're on the East Coast. Again, if you're on the West Coast, we kind of, and outside of the United States, we recognize that would be kind of a tall order. But if you're on the East Coast, particularly, well, and for feedback's sake, I guess anybody can give us that feedback. But take a peek at the site. Let us know what you think, right? We're not quite sure that the secret sauce is just right. And so we're looking for some feedback on what you think we could do to help, convey the message potentially a little bit better. And if there's questions or things that we're not answering, we want to make sure we take care of that. So again, personal favor from me to you, take a peek at the site and then let me know. You can reach out to me on Twitter or email me, carlos.chacon, CHACON, @SQLDataPartners.com, or leave a comment even on the SQL Data Partners site, the podcast page, or the conference site down at the bottom. You can leave a little message and I'll get that and respond to them. Okay, I guess with all that, let's do a little SQL Server in the news.
All right. Well, one new thing that we heard about that's in a private preview mode from Microsoft in the Azure offering is the managed SQL instances as a service offering.
That's right.
And this is sort of a cross somewhere in between your own VM and an Azure SQL database, where you don't really have your own VM, but you get a true SQL instance that would be similar to what you would have if you did have a VM.
Yeah, exactly. I think you have a little bit more play potentially. I'm not sure about like where the databases lay or stored, but as far as like settings and things like that, you have a little bit more control there. You can have multiple databases, and this is probably has to do with the elastic, the elastic groups or pools rather, kind of expanding on this idea a bit.
Yep. And I think that it would be a great thing for us to do a future podcast episode on. So
Sure.
If there's anybody out there who is using that, and when it comes out of preview mode, you want to share with us your experience, we'd love to hear what you're doing with it and how well it's working for you.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Because particularly looking at some of the marketing that is that Microsoft's coming out with. Again, so the headline for this article is "Focus on your business, leave the rest to us." On your business, leave the rest to us, which, again, very common in consulting. I think we even have that line on our website, right?
Yeah.
But this idea that, hey, we'll take care of all your database needs and you don't need them. So it would be interesting to see how, again, this integration works, right? Being able to leverage a service, what things I don't need to worry about anymore, but what things I still do need to worry about and take care of.
Yep. That would definitely be interesting to find out more about that.
Right.
So,
okay. The URLs for today's episode will be at SQLDataPartners.com/monitoring.
or SQLDataPartners.com/102. Now that we're up in the 3 digits.
There you go. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the conversation with Tracy. Tracy, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have another compañera here with us. You're going to join us down in October at the Compañero Conference. And so we threw all of those channels for you being on the show today.
I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, so, I've been telling Steve, we're going to get through all of those ChannelAdvisor folks. And so now we get to cross another one off our list.
Are there any DBAs there that we haven't talked to yet?
There are a couple left, yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so in fact, one of them I met when I was down there in Raleigh. He is a big fan of PSS Diag. And so I talked with him about maybe coming on and seeing if he could convert me.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
Yeah. I am like, it seems like a little, anyway, that's for another episode.
I still want to teach you RML, so.
Oh boy. Yeah, I'm not sure. Not today's episode.
Speaking of which, today's episode is on monitoring availability groups.
Yeah, that's right. I think this is going to be near and dear to anybody who's trying to set up availability groups. And, ultimately that idea that you have, sure that the data is getting over to the secondary node. You're not going to lose that data, that you're kind of meeting your SLAs. being able to ensure that just makes a lot of sense. And so, Tracy, I guess it might be helpful. Why don't we take a minute and just review that data synchronization process as we talk about availability groups? What are the components involved, and maybe what are some of the pieces that we need to be looking at?
Okay. Well, the first step is that the log has to flush to the disk, and you have a log cache that it caches the records into that it has to send over to your secondary server. And it stores it in this area called the log capture area. And it sends that across the network. And at some point, it gets an acknowledge commit depending on whether you're in synchronous or asynchronous mode. And that depends on what mode you're in.
Sure.
So once the log is received on the other side, it's able to harden to disk. And on the other side, you have a redo thread that sits there and replays the pages back onto disk and commits those to disk. You have performance counters that capture your log send queue's size and the rate that it's sent. And you also have the redo size and the redo send rates that are all captured in perf counters on both sides, so you can monitor them.
Right. Now, so we talked about asynchronous versus synchronous, right? So when I send it over, it writes in that second node, it then writes to the log, right? The hardening process. If it's in synchronous, once it writes the log, is that when I get the acknowledgement back? Or does it actually need to go through the redo process before it will acknowledge that?
Once it's hardened to the log, it's sent back as committed. And when you're in async, as soon as it hardens on your primary, it's considered committed.
Okay.
A lot of times it hardens on your primary, it's considered committed.
Okay.
So when we're working with that, then what are the things that we really want to monitor or keep track of to make sure things are working well?
One of the first things you want to make sure you don't have is a lot of network latency. A lot of times this technology, especially if you're in async mode, you're looking at a DR situation where you have your secondary site in a secondary location, like in AWS or in a different data center. So you don't want to have too much network latency. The other thing you want to make sure is that your secondary servers aren't slow and not able to process the data as fast as you need them to. Some companies like to go skimpy on their secondary servers and not have them as fast as their primary servers. They can get behind just because they don't have enough memory or CPU resources. So you want to keep an eye on those redo queues to make sure it's actually able to keep up or not.
Think, okay, well, all that secondary server has got to do is process the log, but on busy systems, that can be quite a bit of work to keep up with that. And I know, and again, ChannelAdvisor, you guys get to play with all the cool toys. At some of the higher transaction rate systems, you actually needed a pretty hefty server, secondary server, just to be able to keep up with that, even though it wasn't actually doing any quote unquote OLTP workload.
Yes, we had a system with 256 gigs of memory on the primary side that we still needed 64 gigs of memory on the secondary side just to process the redo log to keep it current.
Wow.
I mean, we still were able to take 25%
sure,
out, but we tried to go less than that, and we were trying to run in the cloud, which can be a little bit more expensive, and we weren't able to do it. We started off at 16 gigs, and it just wasn't performing.
Now, was that synchronous or asynchronous?
Asynchronous.
Okay. Wow. So even that.
So then, when you say it wasn't performing there, was it just that the continuous load was so great that it couldn't keep up, or was it that there were big sets of transactions that were kicking off at some point in time that were causing it to backlog and not catch up?
We just had too many transactions going. We were hitting 30,000 transactions per second, and it was just backing up on the secondary side. So once we bumped up the memory, it was mainly a memory problem, just trying to read all those pages into the buffer pool,
right?
So that it could update it. And once we bumped it up to 64, it was able to keep up.
So then, with that secondary backing up, if it's backing up to the point that it can never get caught up, what is the point that it can never get caught up? What is the outcome there in the availability group? Is it Does it eventually crash because of that, or is it just very delayed?
It's just very delayed. It's behind to the point where you're not able to fail over if you're not meeting our SLAs. In this instance, we were just testing out AGs for ourselves. It wasn't a production instance for us as far as we wanted to fail over to it. It was just us testing out AGs on a production instance, but not for, a disaster recovery situation, but for us to see what we would need in order to set up a DR situation. And we discovered that, we're going to have to allocate some resources to it.
Now, so that's another interesting question, right? Is that because you are failing over and this is just your test? So when we talk about not keeping up, what's your window there? Is it 1 minute, 5 minutes, an hour, a day? What's the...
It is set to 4 hours.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But we were finding that the server was up to a day behind. Just to put it in perspective, some of that, right? So it wasn't like, you were asking for milliseconds, or something, something like that. I mean, 4 hours that's significant, right?
So,
like I say, you just need to allocate the resources and play with this stuff in your staging environment and make sure you have enough resources. And we played in staging, but we don't have the transactions per second occurring in staging that we have in production. So
I know in your monitoring presentation, there's a few acronyms that you'd brought up along the way, being RTO and RPO and SLA, and how those apply in availability group scenario. Could we maybe talk through a little bit on those and cover what that means to the availability group with the RPO, RTO, and how those apply to SLAs?
Yes.
RTO and how those apply to SLAs?
Yes. The RPO is your recovery point objective, and that tells you how much data you're able to lose. So that measures, how many megabytes or gigabytes of data you're allowed to use. So how much data has changed that you can lose. Your RTO recovers how much time you can lose. So that's, how long it's going to take to do that redo on the other side. So if it says it's a day behind, that's a day you have to wait for that redo log to play. So those two are measured differently. You could have a gig of data behind, but it only take an hour to replay it, or it could be the reverse. You could be a day behind and have a gig of data to replay. It depends on how your system's set up. And those two combine to make your SLAs, your service level agreement, what your businesses agree to allow you to lose data and how much time they're allowing you to recover.
The built-in dashboard for availability groups, how well does that really do the job for you to be able to monitor and know what's going on?
When you're looking at a single AG, it pretty much does the job for you. If you're in our environment where you have 100 plus databases, 100 plus servers, and you're looking to have AGs on all of those, not so well. Because you have to connect to every database to see what's going on.
Right. So kind of broad brush, strokes, it's cumbersome, right? To have to connect to every single one of them.
Yeah, you have to connect to every server and bring up, click on down through the dashboard in Studio Manager and bring it up. That's why I much prefer having a query and using PowerShell and just running against the multiple instances and seeing which ones are in trouble and going and checking those out. But gotcha. Overall, if you have a couple to manage, the dashboard shows you what you need to know.
So it's pretty good there. It's kind of met your needs from an individual availability group or, perspective. But it's just that once you start getting with more than one, then you're going to have to start rolling your own. So I guess talk us through some of the ways or some of the things that you're looking at to accomplish that.
Well, we use the queries that the dashboard runs in the background. One thing we've created is some PowerShell commandlets that we can run, and it returns it in a data grid, and then we can sort and filter, and we can just run that against any of our AGs that we have and find data. We also, have Mark Wilkinson in our team who loads a lot of stuff into Grafana for us so we can see data. So
yeah, the guy likes to meddle. He likes to tinker.
He has our performance monitor counters I was talking about before, our log send queues, our redo queues, and the rates all logged into Grafana for us, so we can go there and view them by instance if we need to.
Gotcha.
So we've got a couple of different solutions that we have that we run with right now.
So when you talk about your PowerShell scripts that you've got there, are those something that's internal and private, or is that something that's available anywhere for other people to take a look at?
I actually have a blog post on my website that you can pretty much plug any SQL script you want into, and it'll run against multiple SQL servers and return it in a grid. So you can run any troubleshooting script you want, and it'll run across any SQL server, any list of SQL servers you provide, and return it in a grid. So
we'll have to include that in our show notes.
That's right.
Link to that.
One another kind of interesting. I will call it a hack, right? Because we like to, I like to call things hacks today. But that little cheat, if you will, of how does SQL Server do something, you pull, of how does SQL Server do something, you pull up the manager or the wizard or the dashboard or whatever, right? And then you pull up Profiler, I'm assuming, or extended events, if you so choose, and then you just figure out how it's getting all its information, and then you use that down the line. I think that's a great way to be able to grab some of that stuff and and understand what the SQL Server team has put together to look at.
Yeah, I saw what I did. At first I pulled up the dashboard. I seen it only comes up with like 5 columns, and it's like, well, that's not very useful. And it has a add remove columns out to the side. So I started looking at the column names, and I was like, these are the things that are useful to me, and that's what I went into the DMVs to find, and that's what I added to my queries.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, so I am curious, and I don't know, and maybe it's different because I know you guys are on AWS. So in episode 76, we had Jimmy May on, and he was talking about some of his testing experience and the improvements that they've made. Particularly, in the redo log and whatnot. And it just made me think, are there scenarios or situations, or is there anything that you can do? So let's just say maybe the scenario would be, and I guess it's not really a cluster. So patching, this may not work, but I'm going to use the patching scenario, right? Because maybe not exactly what I'm looking for, but you need to fail over. You want to move from one node to the other for whatever reason, right? Mm-hmm. And let's say that gotten behind. What are you going to do, or what kinds of things are you looking for to help you get back up to speed?
Well,
does that make sense?
Yeah. In our situation, the AGs we currently haven't run for AGs. We have a different solution for DR at the moment. So those are synchronous and up to date. But if you were doing an async environment, because we have done this to do migrate from 2014 to 2016, we used AGs. Mm-hmm. So we set up AGs as asyncs. And then when we got ready to fail over, we set them as syncs the day before so that they would get called up. And then we did the failover. So it'd be the same. Okay, it'd be the same way with patching. You would go ahead and patch your server, set it to sync, force it to catch up, and once it's caught up, you'd fail over to the patch server.
Gotcha.
So then I guess one of the things that I'm interested in is that with the monitoring that you're doing, it sounds like you're doing your own beyond what the built-in is, just so you can get across multiple servers all at once. But are there additional things that you're monitoring that aren't part of what you would see through the normal dashboard there?
The only thing I'd say I'm doing differently is the rates. The rates in the dashboard aren't updated in DMVs live because Microsoft only updates those when data is being sent across. So if you're not actively sending data, the rates aren't updated. So if you've got some monitoring around your rates, they may not always be accurate. So I do the monitoring based on the first line counters DMV rather than DMV that just stores the rates for availability groups. So I have it as part of my downloads for my presentation. I have a thing that captures it, waits a second, captures it again, and actually calculates the rates so that you can see the difference between what the DMV for availability groups say and what Perfmon actually says the rate actually is. Just in case you need to know what the real rate of transfer actually is occurring. But other than that, it's pretty much straight what the queries are running from the dashboard.
Okay, great.
Now there is another feature or option that is available to us to be a little more proactive, if you will, as far as letting SQL Server notify us when it has a problem. A lot of us are going to be familiar with the alerts. I don't know if they're called the agent alerts, right? But these are the 19 to 25 or 20 to 25, and then those like 1832, 1824, etc. Right, when it has a problem reading from disk, things like that. Yes. SQL Server can say, "Hey, I had this problem. Just thought you should know." We have a couple of those for active or for availability groups, right?
Yes, there's about 5. I think there's 5 of them. There's a error 1480 that lets you know if the server failed over. There's an alert for when the disk runs out of space, for example.
Gotcha.
There's also one that'll tell you when it resumes. So if it decides to resume by itself, or if somebody actually clicks the button and resumes it. Tell you if the AG goes offline for some reason. And it'll also, if you're in synchronous mode, it'll tell you if the AG is not ready for an automatic failover, if you've got it set up for automatic failover. All those numbers are available using you can look those up online or download my slide deck.
And I suppose maybe with something like that, right, not keeping up, some tinkering would need to be involved to kind of make sure that you have the right secondary formula. Because I would imagine you don't want to be getting a lot of those emails.
Yes.
You get a couple of them, you're like, okay, more memory in the secondary or something, right? Like,
yeah. Well, that's why, you wouldn't configure your secondary for automatic failover if you didn't want to know if it wasn't ready for automatic failover, for example. So.
And I guess the automatic failover, those are probably going to be a little more similar in size.
Yeah.
In size.
Yeah, you're definitely going to want to have those set up exactly the same. That way, when it fails over, you got the exact same performance going on, because those are going to hopefully happen at 3 a.m. And I wouldn't necessarily, you necessarily wouldn't get paged when something fails over automatically either, because hopefully that's what you wanted, so you could sleep.
Right.
That's why we invented AGs, to sleep.
Yeah. So when you're monitoring your availability groups, are there any wait statistics that you normally take a look at or keep an eye on just to see how things are going?
There are a few that you can keep an eye on. The one to watch out for is there's one HADR sync commit to tell you if it's taken a while to commit on your side. I've seen that one pop up when waiting to commit. We noticed that a lot when we were low on memory. The other one is write log. That'll typically occur if it's just taking a long time to write the log on your secondary. Other than that, I haven't seen any in particular that have popped up in our environment.
Okay. So with the sync commit, is that when it's doing the synchronous, or when it's in synchronous mode and it's doing the commit, and you wouldn't see that if you're running in async mode?
I've seen it in async and sync. So
it's in both. Okay.
It's just whenever it's doing a commit. Yeah.
Yep. Got it. All right. And then as far as any extended events, is there anything we should be aware of or keep an eye on there when we're working with availability groups?
Most of your extended events, it creates an always on health session by default for always on. And everything you need is pretty much in there as far as events that you need, including all those agent alerts we were talking about.
Oh, okay.
And that's
it creates a separate event, separate monitor, or it just includes them in the default extended event trace?
It creates a separate one for you.
A separate one.
Okay. Yeah, a separate one called Always On.
Okay. So many.
All those alerts, the agent alerts we were talking about, those are all included in there as part of my demos that I do at the presentation. I've got queries that query those out. And we actually, as part of our internal monitors, just query those directly rather than receive SQL agent alerts.
Sure. Okay.
Because we use a third-party solution for our monitoring rather than getting a whole bunch of SQL agent alerts.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, once you get so many instances, you're going to want kind of a complete solution there.
Yeah, we don't want but so many emails.
Exactly. Well, awesome, Tracy. Great information on availability groups. We do appreciate it.
No problem.
Should we go ahead and do SQL Family?
Sure thing.
So, Tracy, how did you first get started with SQL Server?
Well,
wow.
And not.
So, Tracy, how did you first get started with SQL Server?
Well, I was a developer at a company that wanted some reports, and Access wasn't quite cutting it as far as querying stuff. So I imported some data into SQL, Well, I had to learn a lot of stuff. And then I just kind of got hooked on it ever since. I took some training classes on it, and next thing I knew, I was a DBA.
Wow.
And not a developer anymore.
Very nice. It's interesting to see how often Access is the lead into SQL Server for people.
Tracy, I know you guys are using a lot of features over there at ChannelAdvisor, but if you could change one thing about SQL Server, what would it be?
Right now, I wish Hackathon would quit writing so much to my error logs.
Gotcha.
I'm getting gigabyte log files every night on my system drives, and they're driving me crazy.
Oh, wow. That is a lot of data.
And it's just informational messages.
And there's no flag or nothing to turn that stuff off.
Nope. I'll stick with that one for right now.
What does Joe say about that? Surely he knows about it.
I don't know what Brian's mentioned it to him. I'm not sure what Microsoft said about it yet.
Okay, very good.
All right. What is the best piece of career advice that you've ever received?
Well, just to always keep learning stuff. Yeah, the field changes a lot in IT. So what you know now is going to change. As you can tell with SQL Server, we're getting releases like every year. And now we got to learn a new operating system.
Yeah.
All right.
Never stop learning. Tracy, our last and favorite question for you today. If you could have one superhero power, what would it be and why do you want it?
Want to be able to teleport.
Teleportation, okay. And why is that?
A lot of time.
There you go. Very good. Awesome. Tracy, thanks again for being on the program with us today.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Thanks, Tracy.
So, Steve, my kind of takeaway here is that diligence is the key.
Right.
Yeah. You still got to kind of keep up with it. And that while they do give you the dashboard, it still kind of sounds like you have to be a bit creative and get in there and kind of homegrown, I don't want to say homegrown tools, but again, it's kind of the onus is a little bit on you to keep up with what's going on with the availability group.
Yep. And I think that that's one of those things that we see time and time again. The first time someone builds out an availability group, it's like you just get it going and you're happy that it's running.
Exactly.
Sometimes the monitoring and knowing what's working and knowing what's going wrong gets overlooked.
Right. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because actually setting up an availability group because there is that cluster there, at least in the old models, right? Now things are changing, right, with availability groups. So don't depending on what version you're using, they now have clusterless availability groups and all these other things. But the first time I set it up, I meant to set up an availability group, but I accidentally installed a cluster.
Oh.
And so I went a little too far, right, with it. And so kind of understanding that process. And yeah, when I finally got it straight, I was like, hey, hooray, I did it.
Yep.
And then you're like, oh, now I got to keep up with it.
Yeah, it seems like there's more and more things that we have to keep track and monitor with every new feature that Microsoft introduces.
Sure. And I think, some of that will come as this continues to evolve a bit into what the final version, if you will, that sticks around because, it continues to change in each new release.
Yep.
Whether that be, features or improvements, which we talked about with Jimmy earlier. And so, yeah, it will be interesting to see what kind of the final, if that's even a realistic idea, version of the availability groups looks like.
Yep. Okay. Well, I think it was a great interview. I enjoyed the conversation.
Yes. Thanks again, Tracy, for your time. Our music for SQL Server in the News is by Mansardi and used under Creative Commons. If you have something that you think we should be talking about on the podcast, you can reach out to us, SQLDataPartners.com/podcast. You can leave a message there, either through SpeakPipe or a note on the page, or you can reach out to us via social media. On LinkedIn, I am at Carlos L. Chacon.
And on LinkedIn, you can find me as Steve Stedman. We'll see you on the SQL Trail.
SQL Data Partners.